Irish mythology and the Cronides. Celtic mythology is pretty complex. There's different names for the gods and goddesses across the board with Celtic mythology. There's Welsh and Irish and Iberian, and some of this Celtic people actually went into Germany as well. But for this video, I want to concentrate on the Irish version of things. There's a very good book out that I'll talk about in a bit called The Irish Mythological Cycle and Celtic Mythology by M. Du Bois de Jubenville and Richard Irvine Best. And in it, they break things down. And basically, they state in there, and I'll get to the passages, that Bridget is the equivalent of Athena. And I want to talk a little bit about this Irish mythological cycles. Well, they divide their history into 4 different cycles. And the first one is the mythological cycle, which would be the cycles of the gods, which would be the war between the Fomorians and the Tuatha De Danann. And the second then would be the Ulster cycle, which is basically a period of time for what they call the Red Branch cycle, basically following the history of Ulaid and Ulster, and some of the heroes, Chuclane, hopefully I pronounced some of this right, and some of the people involved with him. And then the next cycle would be the Fianna cycle, which is the Fenian cycle, which has to do with that giant Finn McCool and his story, from what I'm reading and understanding. And the last would be the cycle of the kings of Ireland up to Brian Boru. And then we have current history. But I'm mostly interested in the mythological cycle, which is the time period of the Cronides. Okay, I want to talk about this Bridget. And I have up here the cross of Bridget. That's one of her famous symbols. Now, Bridget was the daughter of the father god Dagda. Now, Dagda would be the equivalent of Zeus and the Nordic Odin and several of his other equivalents across the world. And she was one of the Tuatha De Danann, and she ended up being the wife of King Bree of the Fomorians. And they ended up having a son, Ruadin, but he was killed later, and she married somebody else and had children by them. But the rumor is her brother Lug came back and killed King Bree because he was a very evil person. And from what we learn is that the Fomorians were also considered a supernatural race, but they were very hostile to the people that were already in Ireland, the Nemedians, and they were forcing them to hand over their children. This is what the Fomorians did, to hand over their children for human sacrifice. Now, there are some people that suggest the Fomorians were Carthaginians. Well, yeah, they probably were all related because the Carthaginians came out of ancient Tyre, and that's where they established this human sacrifice cult of children. So when these Tuatha De Danann came in, they found out what they were doing and went to war with these Fomorians. So when these Tuatha De Danann came in, they found out that there was a king that these Fomorians had. That his name was Nuada. He was dethroned because he had lost an arm in battle, and this King Bree took over. And Bree was just pretty merciless. But at first, the Tuatha De Danann had lost and gotten taken captive and turned into slaves. And then they worked with this king. They created a silver arm for him. And he, with these Tuatha De Danann, went back to try and take the kingship back. And they went to battle again. And unfortunately, that king Nuada was killed. But after the second battle, the Tuatha De Danann won. And they were going to kill King Bree, who surrendered and asked for mercy. And in exchange for mercy, he would marry Bridget and follow her ways. And so he was granted that. But um, Lug, who would be the equivalent of the Greek Apollo, and the Dagda would be Zeus, had a plan, and they were going to let him go so far to teach the agricultural cults of the Tuatha De Danann. So here we go, agriculture cults, because he promised to teach the Tuatha De agriculture is what it's called. So here again is another one of those key comparisons, that goes along with my mythological unification theory to show these are the same gods. And I've told you in my research, they traveled all over the world. And unfortunately, when they got to Ireland, it was a lot tougher. So, but they won after the second battle. So they let this King Bree marry Bridget and have a son with her. And then she fully implemented the Tuatha De agricultural ways and got rid of the human sacrifice, although it appears to me it crept back in. Um, they had some god, Crom Crec, which almost looks like Kronos because he had a crescent and they were still human sacrificing. And when basically St. Pietra came in, he was the last to get rid of all of it. But, and interestingly, drive out the serpents, right? Serpent cult, Druids, human sacrifice, Fomorians, Phoenicians, all of it goes back. Carthaginians. So she married him, and took over, and she was well liked. And eventually, Lug came back and killed him, and her daughter with Lug was killed. So that bloodline was eliminated, and she ended up marrying someone else and having children. And her bloodline went down to be these Tuatha De Danann descendants and kings and queens until the Molassians from Egypt. Okay, so here's another Osirian pharaonic connection came in and took over, and then the rest of the history is the British removed the kings of Ireland and took it away, try to conquer and destroy the Irish, but that's a history for another day. So she is the equivalent of Athena, and this is where she ended up. And Lug, being Apollo, I've told you in some of my other research and videos, is also the equivalent of the Nordic Frey. He went up to Norway and Sweden, and he started the kingship line there, and that's written about in the Hemskringla by Snorri Sturluson. So here's where some of the rest of this Cronide bloodline went and took over the royal houses. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit from this book, The Irish Mythological Cycle in Celtic Mythology. Okay, on page 9. In Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann, together with Partholon and Nemed, who on some points are the counterparts of the Tuatha De Danann, have as their rivals the Fomorians. Dagda, king of the Tuatha De Danann, is the Zeus, or Ormads, of Irish mythology. The Tuatha De Danann, or folk of the god of Dana, are none other than the Deva of India, the gods of day or light and of light. The Fomore, or Formorians, who are the adversaries of the Tuatha De Danann, represent in Ireland a mythological group corresponding to the Indian Asura and the Greek Titans. Their chief, Bri, or Baler, or Tethra, is sprung from a mythical conception originally identical with that which produced the Greek Kronos, the Iranian Ahriman, the Vedic Yama, king of the dead, father of the gods, Svatstre, god of the father of the Vedas, and the Vedic Varuna, old supreme god supplanted by Indra. Okay, I'm going to stop. This is exactly what I've been telling you all along, and here it is in this book. Now I'm just read a little bit more here from page 9. Tethra, chief of the Fomorians, overcome in the battle of Mag Turid, became king of the dead in the mysterious region they inhabit across the water. So, also, the Greek Kronos, overcome in the battle between Zeus and the Titans, reigns in the distant Isles of the Almighty, or the Isle of the Bleat, over the dead heroes who fought at Thebes and Troy. Okay. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to page 52 after this book talked a little bit about the Nemedians and Caesar and Parthenons, a couple other people that came before the Nemedians who didn't make it, but let me read a little bit here. It is he that has begotten dwarfs, the Fomorians, men with goats' heads, and all deformed beings that are found among men. That is the reason the descendants of Shem were exterminated, and their country given over to the children of Israel because of the curse their father had put upon them. Shem is the ancestor of monsters. They are not descended from Cain, as Godel says. Indeed, no one of the race of Cain survived the deluge, for the deluge was sent to destroy the race of Cain. The oldest texts know nothing of these biblical origins ascribed to the Fomorians by the Irish Christian scholars. The Book of Invasions simply says that the Formorians came to Ireland over sea. The document we have just cited is, moreover, of great importance. The title announces that it deals with the history of dwarfs and Formorians. From this, one could conclude that the Formorians are giants. And indeed, Giraldus Cambrensis in the Topographia Hibernica renders Formorchab, the dative plural of the name Formorians, in the corresponding passage in the Book of Invasions by the word gigantibus. All right, let me stop. So, this guy is trying to compare the Bible to this ancient mythology, but I mean, some of it goes, some of it doesn't. The Bible is just from the cult of Jupiter Sabazius, which is the Jewish point of view, and the Roman point of view, because they put it together. But what this is saying is that it deals with the fact that there were dwarfs and giants, and that these Fomorians were giants, and they were into human sacrifice, and they came from the sea. Well, that's Phoenicians out of Tyre who began to institute that practice. Now, let me read a couple more pages. Page 54. The most important feature in the legend of the Fomorians is their war against the gods of the solar light and of life. In other words, the Tuatha De Danann. Monstrous both in size and in shape, some of them having goats' heads, and others only one hand and one foot, they are the Celtic expression of conceptions identical with those which in Greek mythology have given to the monsters that war against the solar deities. In Greek mythology, we find Zeus battling with the giants, whom he overthrows and binds in chains. Okay, I'm going to stop. So this guy also makes the same conclusion that I've made. It's the same people and two sides of the family just fighting with each other. And he goes on and he talks in this book about the war between the Nemedians and the Fomorians. And let me just read on page 57, as I told you, what these Fomorians were doing to these people, these giant Fomorians, to probably average sized people. From this place, they commanded the whole of Ireland and imposed a heavy tribute annually upon the people, namely, 2/3 of the children they had brought into the world within the year, and 2/3 of the corn and milk the year had produced. The tax was levied on the night of November the 1st, on the feast of Samhain, when summer ends and winter begins, the symbol of death. Payment was made in the place called Mag Setni. Mag Setni means the same plane. That plane, always the same, whither everything that has life goes, and where the gods of death hold sway. It is the mysterious land men pass on to after death. All right, I'm going to skip again. On page 58 of the tribute exacted by the Formorians, the most oppressive and at the same time the most characteristic was that which was paid in children. Here we have a legend analogous to the Attic myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. The Minotaur, like some of the Fomorians, is a horned being in place of a goat's head. However, he has a bull's head upon a human body. Like the Fomorians, too, he inhabits an island, which is Turinus in the Irish tale, and Crete in the Athenian legend. All right, so it continues on. Um, what they were doing. All right, so basically, they were killing 2/3 of their children. And the Nemedians were trying to fight them off and couldn't. So, eventually the Tuatha De Danann, which would be these Cronides with Zeus, the leader, came in and defeated them. And they're wearing goat's heads as followers of Cronus. Cronus, Capricorn, December is his month. Okay. All right, I'm going to skip to page 60. The idol of the plane of adoration, the bloody head. Sen Cruach, as the legend of St. Patrick describes it, or the bloody curve, the bloody crescent. Crom Cruach, as it is called in the other text, was a distant epoch, the object of a terrible cult. Human victims were immolated in its honor. The tribute was the same as that formerly exacted by the Fomorians, according to the legend. No mention is made of these awful sacrifices in the lives of St. Patrick. They had been abolished when the famous missionary came with the gospel, but they had not been forgotten. All right. So it's Moloch. So the bloody crescent is that symbol of Kronos. And Zeus had to come in and end that practice that his father had instituted in Ireland. It was pretty bad. And he was successful, and they had to take over the royal houses. Now, they're not supposed to do any of that stuff, but I think there's some whispers of what's going on with some of these royal houses today who are of questionable descent. Okay, I want to talk a little bit here on page 81. The name Tuatha De Danann means folk of the god whose mother is called Dana. Genitive Danann or Danan, Dana, nominative Danann in Middle Irish, is elsewhere called Bridget. She is the mother of the three gods who are known sometimes as Brian, Icar, and Uar, and at other times as Brian, Icarbar, and Icair. These three mythical beings are the gods of art and literature, De Dana, or the gods, sons of the goddess Dana. De Dana, Dana or Dana, also called Bridget, their mother, was the wife of Bree, king of the Fomorians, but she belonged by birth to the other divine race, her father being Dagda, or the good god, king of the Tuatha De Danann. She was regarded as the goddess of literature. Okay, we know that's Athena. Okay. Now Athena is or was the goddess of arts and crafts and writing and intelligent warfare. Now it's believed that the Tuatha De Danann were defeated by the Melasians, that all of them withdrew in palaces under the ground in Ireland, including the Dagda, who comes out occasionally. It's said that there's an underground palace of Dagda at Brugna Boyne, or Sidmach and Ak. Angus, son of the Dagda. Okay, he also had other sons. I think Kermat would be more like the son equivalent with Dionysus Osiris, although Angus maybe as well. Celtic mythology is a tougher nut to crack. All right, let me read a little bit out of this book again. Page 152. The site of the underground palace of the Dagda is determined by the earliest tradition is from the archaeological point of view one of the most interesting in Ireland. Of the three great tumuli there, two have been opened, and they each present the appearance of a vast mortuary chamber now empty. Frequent mention is made in Irish literature of the underground palace of the Dagda here at Brugna Boyne. A poem ascribed to Sinanha Actacane, who died in 975, affirms that before the Battle of Magtur, two lovers slept there in the same bed. These were Boann, or the river Boni, deified wife of the Dagda, and the god Dagda himself. When the Tuatha De Danann were transformed into mortal men in Christian times, it was related that the place called Brugna Boyne, held by pagan tradition to be the site of the Dagda's underground palace, was the cemetery in which his primitive race used to bury its chieftains. The history of burial places, Senchus na Relic, which was probably written about the end of the 11th century, affirms that the Dagda, Lug, Ogma, and other great personages of the Tuatha De Danann race received burial here. There seems to be no doubt that this spot was used as a royal burying ground in historic times. The majority of the high kings of Ireland were buried there during the first 4 centuries of the present era. Okay, I'm going to stop reading. Just this also says it would also, let me just read this. It would be interesting to know whether the 3 great mounds of the Boyne, those of Knowth, Newgrange, and Douth, could be attributed to the Irish kings of the first 4 centuries of the present era, or whether they must be referred to prehistoric populations anterior to the Celtic race known as the Godels or Scots. All right, I'm going to stop. So basically, I don't believe that Dagda, which would be Zeus, was buried there. From what I can tell, he died in Sweden, and they cremated him and all of his belongings, according to the Hemskringla. But I would bet that Athena is buried also known as Bridget, is buried somewhere in Ireland, and all of her descendants as well. So that is putting the connections between Celtic mythology and the Cronides together. There were people there that had established some colonies, and unfortunately, they ended up going against these Fomorians, who were giants, seafarers, Phoenicians, and these Formorians really abused them and took 2/3 of their children and did Moloch on them. And they couldn't, they weren't able to fight them off until Zeus, Dagda, came in with his family, killed off most of these nasty Formorians, and took over the royal house and implemented their peaceful ways of agriculture. So, but the memory's still there. And as the book said, by the time St. Patrick came in, that practice wasn't going on. Some of the idols were still there, but even though the practice was long gone, the memory of what was happening was still there in Ireland. And as you see in my research, and I've told you this, whatever these people were, they were of gigantic stature and strength. They were seafaring, and half of that, the family was abusive, and they were followers of Cronus, who instituted this disgusting human sacrifice practice of children. And the other half, from his son Zeus, traveled the world to end it. And this practice is both sides, there's evidence for both sides of this family all over the world. And as I discussed in my research with these Native American mounds, there was a lot of human sacrifice and cannibalism going on all over that Mississippian culture that, to me, appears to be some sort of European Phoenician origin. There's just no way you're going to tell me a Chinese person came over and just thought about making mounds, which, and the same shape as the mounds in Europe, and came up with this human sacrifice ritual and burning them. I mean, I just read an article that in ants land, some of these bones, they're burnt. Not even just a human sacrifice, but they were, burnt. So this practice of this human sacrifice, especially of children or young women and men, that came out of Phoenicia. It came from Cronus. And Zeus tried to end that. And I've shown you in some of my other videos that cross of Quetzalcoatl, it's found in the Sumerian cylinders, it's found in the Nevada petroglyphs, and in the temple of Gnosis, it's the same cross. So evidence is everywhere. Like I said, these Cronides under Zeus tried to end some of these disgusting practices and institute their peaceful agricultural cults. And in some places it worked. And when they took over the royal house, it did. In other places it didn't. And unfortunately, many of the genetic bloodlines of Zeus have been killed off. Look at all the royal bloodlines in Europe they've killed off. They got rid of the Irish royal bloodline, the Scottish royal bloodline, the Tsar of Russia they've killed off. World War I, they got rid of Archduke Ferdinand and his wife, and on and on and on, and the Caesars are gone, and yet, we still have some royal bloodline, and a lot of them have red hair, and there's all kind of whispers about really where did they come from, and perhaps that they are still practicing some sort of human sacrifice of children on the quiet side. Those rumors are floating around, so to me, those may not be Cronide bloodline. They may be some sort of Promethean bloodline or some other kind of bloodline that is really not the bloodline of God, and doing things that they shouldn't be. and killing off the other bloodlines so there's no competition and no one to go against them and no one to know the history. So this is another piece of the puzzle, and I've done some videos on the Nordic connections to the Cronides. So I've connected up the Greek, I've connected up the Egyptian mythology, Hinduism, Celtic mythology, Nordic mythology, and over to some of the Native American mounds and some of the things going on in the Americas, and as well as ancient Sumer. So I've connected up quite a bit. Eventually, I might get into some of the Chinese and Japanese mythologies, and those connect up because the Japanese royal house, to me, from all appearances, go back to the Osirian pharaohs. Um, Except some of their symbolism is reversed. The female is the sun goddess, but as you get into Amaterasu and the story of her brother and anger at another brother, you'll see it's the story of Isis, Osiris, and Set. Some of the Chinese mythology with the Jade Emperor, to me, smacks of Zeus and the Cronides again. So I may do something on that, but I've covered quite a bit, and you should be putting the pieces of the puzzle together of this hidden human story of the past. Thank you.